Well, thank you everyone for joining us over on Zoom tonight for our first Zoom webinar. And so we thank you for your patience as we work through the technical difficulties we ran into this evening. Tonight, you are joining us for the School Food Policy in the Era of COVID-19 webinar. My name is Jessica Brinkley, and I am a Senior Program and Policy Specialist in the National Education Association's ESP Quality Department. And I wanted to welcome you tonight to this webinar. Myself, along with my colleague, Tim Barchek, who is also a Senior Program Policy Specialist in the NEA ESP Quality Department, will be serving as your facilitators for this evening's webinar. This presentation is brought to you by NEA's ESP Quality Department in collaboration with the NEA Center for Advocacy, NEA's Education Policy and Practice Department, as well as NEA New Mexico. The ESP Quality Department is housed in NEA Center for Great Public Schools and represents and advocates for nearly 500,000 NEA Education Support Professional members, also referred to as ESP. Our strategic focus is to elevate ESP careers by developing, implementing, and promoting best practices, policies, and professional supports that equip ESP with the knowledge and skills to become empowered leaders, accomplished professionals, and members of a high-quality workforce prepared to meet the needs of the whole student. Before we get started this evening, I want to take just a couple more minutes just to walk you through some important housekeeping items, especially that now that we are on this different platform. First and foremost, this session is being recorded. We will send out an email link to the webinar recording 7 to 10 business days after the conclusion of this webinar. To help ensure that we capture a quality recording, participant phones have been placed in a listen-only mode. And if you're listening through the computer, as you're joining with the computer audio, that has also been placed in listen-only mode. So we ask that you please do not unmute your microphones so that we can get a clean recording. If you should have any questions as we are going through tonight's webinar in this new platform, we ask that you please post your questions in the chat area, and we will monitor those questions and try to make sure that we get back to, and we'll have a question and answer portion at the end of tonight's session, and we'll try to make sure that we capture all of those questions as they come up. If we, by chance, do not have the opportunity to get to your question, we will be sure to follow with you after tonight's webinar. We do have several handouts for the PowerPoint, as well as a certificate of participation that is available for everyone who has joined us tonight. We will load those into the chat area as files at the end of the session. We do not have a survey set up right now for this platform, so we won't have a survey for you to fill out for this particular session, but we will have the files available for you to download. If you should run into technical issues with downloading the files from that chat area, please send an email with a request in the subject line that's just requesting a certificate or the handouts. The email address is espqweb@nea.org, and I will type that into the chat area in just a few moments. If you are joining tonight and would like to have a personalized certificate and you are a participant of tonight's live webinar, you can also request that at that same email address, espqweb@nea.org. So at this time, I would like to turn things over to Ignacio.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ignacio Sanchez, and I'm the Director of Professional Learning at NEA New Mexico. I want to thank you for your patience. We're going to get through this, and we're going to get a lot out of it. I really do believe this. I'm pleased and excited to co-host this webinar with my colleagues, Kristen Driscoll and Hedika Castañón. We look forward to sharing some time with you and exploring school food policy in the era of COVID-19. I will now hand it over to you, Angelica. Next slide.
Can we get the next slide, please? Thank you. So we begin by acknowledging that we across the country meet on the traditional land served by Native peoples. We honor America's first people and all elders, past, present, and emerging. And we are called on to learn and share what we learn about the tribal history, culture, and contributions that have been suppressed in telling the story of America.
And here are our objectives for you today. This is what we want you to get out of this. By the end of this webinar, you will understand the federal emergency response for school meals, share local experiences, and commit to taking action to advocate for students and educators in this extraordinary time. Kristen?
Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you guys tonight. I'm Kristen Driscoll. I'm a lobbyist with NEA's Government Relations Department. ESPs, you do NEA proud, and we all owe you an incredible debt for what you're doing on the front lines for students every day. I want to say first that being the GR liaison to ESPQ is one of the most rewarding parts of my job, and we're in awe of how ESPs have risen to meet the moment of COVID-19. We're going to share a lot of information in the next hour, but when it comes down to it, our true purpose is for all of us to share with each other your value to students during this time. Your support in so many ways is crucial to students making it through. We want you to know how much power you have on the ground and how that power translates into making your voice heard with policymakers and how to use that power, especially at this time. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I want to give you a sense of the scope of the need, but I don't think I need to because you guys know more than 20 million students across the country rely on free and reduced price meals at school every day. And we need to make sure they have access to food even when the school buildings are physically closed to them. And we need to make sure that their families, so many of whom are experiencing extreme financial hardship, have access to additional resources for food. Some families are experiencing food insecurity for the very first time in their lives, and for others, times of struggle to make ends meet have gotten far worse. And I actually wanted to share with you guys too. These are pictures from the elementary school in my neighborhood. And I walked by there the other day, not during the grab and go time, but I was just so moved by this. There were so many signs in the windows from the food assistants, from the school food service workers and from some of the other educators, just saying how much they missed and loved the children. And I just wanted to share that with you. I wanted to say too that when educators started serving meals to students almost immediately when schools shut down, watching our members get foods to kids that you know are going to go hungry without that food was beyond impressive. And it really was one of those first feel-good stories, if there were some of the shutdown, but it also filled me with a sense of dread. And that dread was concern that if our nation's incredible healthcare workers didn't have enough personal protective equipment, then certainly school food service workers and other employees still working in schools and interacting with the community would not. So we're going to talk a lot more about what Congress has done to address both the issue of protective equipment and the enormous issues around school food, and what still needs to be done. If I could have the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what Congress has done already. Congress and the administration, and in many places where they haven't done everything they need to do, addressing the issues of food insecurity is one place where things started to happen quickly, which is good, but there's a lot still to be done. So back in March, which seems both 2 minutes ago and a long time ago, Congress passed two large pieces of legislation that included help for both education and for food assistance. Those were the Families First Act and the CARES Act. There's a lot of stuff in these bills. I'm not going to go into all the details, but I want to share some of the big picture nutrition assistance and education, very big picture education things. The CARES Act included the very important Education Stabilization Fund. That's a $30.7 billion fund that's going to be run through the Department of Education to send money to states and local education agencies to provide assistance to schools and to institutions of higher education during the crisis. And like I said, there's a lot in this fund that we're not going to talk about tonight, but you can find all of that information on some of the links we're going to share with you. But one thing I did want to make sure that I mentioned on this call is that the money in that fund can be used to protect educator jobs. On the nutrition front, though, the bills in March provided a number of waivers to increase schools' flexibility to serve meals to students. Angelica is going to discuss those in more detail in a bit for you. And it also provided billions of dollars to address implementing those waivers. Congress and USDA also turned on the pandemic EBT program, which helps families who have children who receive free and reduced price meals get additional SNAP benefits. And for non-SNAP households to get a new EBT card with funds for children to make up for missing school meals. And Angelica will talk a little bit more in detail about how that's going on the ground too. Congress also provided billions for emergency SNAP to address the increases in number of people who are going to be needing SNAP benefits and who already do. I want to talk a little bit more about PPE for ESPs. The Education Stabilization Fund that I mentioned, that allows for some of the planning and coordinating around closures, including how to provide meals for students. And it also provides training and professional development for staff on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious diseases. Theoretically, this is where PPE for ESPs would come in. Congress thinks it's an allowable use here, and we'd like them to get more specific on this. So it's something I'm going to talk about on the next slide, which you can go ahead and put up. So we're actually asking Congress to do a lot of things. One of the things that we've been saying quite a bit is it's not enough. It's a great first step, but it is not enough. As you all know, the need grows and grows every day economically. The shortfalls for state budgets are going to be huge. And you know, we want to make sure that we can shore up our schools as much as possible. We're asking Congress in the areas of nutrition in particular, in education generally, to provide at least $175 billion more for the Education Stabilization Fund when they do a next package. We want them to extend pandemic EBT into the summer and into the next school year, and we want them to increase SNAP benefits. We need them to fund the cost of keeping school food service programs running and be specific about funding for PPE for educators still on the front lines. I have to say, when we first started talking about PPE with Hill staff, for a very short time, it was a theoretical conversation. I thought people are going to get sick, and then it started to happen. And as you know, sadly, too many of your colleagues have passed, and it's just too much to even bear. And we need to make sure that every educator who's still on the front lines has the protective equipment they need to be able to continue serving students, every single one. So I know I give a broad brush on this, but I want to talk a little bit about what you can do to get Congress to do what we need them to do. If Jessica, if you could move the slide. The power that we talked about in the beginning, to get this done, we're going to need your help. Your members of Congress need to hear from you. They hear from lobbyists like me all the time. The GR team spends a lot of time on Capitol Hill. Well, we've been doing it virtually, like we all have been doing lots of things virtually. And we spend a lot of time talking with people on both sides of the aisle, haggling over legislation. But what brings us over the finish line is you. Members of Congress and their staff need to know what's happening in their own backyards, and they need you to tell them what you, your school, and your students need. We can give them a roadmap, but doing the work on the front lines makes it local and very real for them. So we're asking you and everyone you know to visit the NEA Legislative Action Center on the EdVotes webpage. The link is right here. And you can very easily email both of your senators and your representatives and ask them to help educators and students now. It's a pretty easy URL. So if you'll take note of it for later, and maybe we can ask that to get sent out too. It's nea.org. slash COVID action. And just to wrap up this section, let you know that Congress is working on another package. There's a lot of partisanship at play, unfortunately, not surprisingly, but really unfortunately in this time. But we're hopeful that we'll see something in the coming weeks, and we'll keep you posted as things develop. But please make your voices heard. It really does make a difference. I'm going to turn things over to Angelica.
Thank you, Kristen. May we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So Kristen mentioned something that you can do immediately after this webinar. You know, reach out to your senators and representatives and make sure your voices are heard. And after you do that, other things that you can do when you go back on site, you go back to your districts, you go back to your school meal sites. Keep an eye out for these activities. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has passed a lot of waivers, 21 waivers exactly, to make sure that families and students have access to meals and food. So these waivers now enable our schools to do some of the following activities. Offer grab and go meals, so the meals that you see offered in like the little lunch bags or pickup and drive-through sites at your schools. These waivers allow us to serve multiple meals. So not just breakfast and lunch, but you can serve breakfast, lunch, snack, and supper if those options are available to you. You can also serve multiple days worth of meals at your sites. So this is especially helpful if you're in a rural area and the school site is difficult to access for families. So you can provide families with boxes of meals for up to a week. Another thing that these waivers allow us to do is to deliver meals. And also if you're in a rural area, you have access to the Meals to You program. You have to visit the Meals to You site just to make sure that that's something that is available to you in your district. Not all districts qualify for that. Also, our schools and food sponsors can serve meals without providing educational and enrichment activities during this pandemic. Meals can also be served to caregivers, parents, and guardians without the presence of students. So if your school site is denying meals to families because students are not present, please let us know. We have a national waiver that makes sure that families can show up to sites without students present and receive meals. Another thing these waivers are allowing us to do is serve meals in areas that do not meet the 50% requirement, and also known as area eligibility. Again, if you're being denied serving meals in this area, let us know. If your waiver in the meantime was denied by your state agency, you can still serve meals in this area. You'll just need to directly target households with children who are eligible for free or reduced price meals. And finally, the last waiver enables our schools to continue serving meals until June 30th. So if your school usually ends, let's say, May 11th, you can still continue serving meals past May 11th up to June 30th. You can even serve meals over spring breaks, over the weekends. You can do your backpack meal programs. All of that can still continue. And then also, I just want to point out in this picture, we do have one of our awesome food service workers handing out food to a family directly to their car. This is no longer a best practice. We are trying to send out guidance that says that we need to stay 6 feet away from the families and offer food through a cart. And we can provide links to guidance if that's something that you would like to have. Next slide, please. So some really cool national best practices that we're seeing. Again, these waivers are allowing us to serve our families and our students in need. And our schools, our ESPs, as always, innovative and creative, are doing some really awesome things to make sure that we're addressing the needs. So some of our schools, as you all can attest to, are serving meal kits. So instead of doing daily pickup and doing just lunch and breakfast. Our students are now getting boxes of food with loaves of bread, packets of lunch meat, a bag of salad mix, a half-gallon of milk, whole vegetables, fruits. And this is especially important if you're having low participation rates at your site. So if you're doing like these meal kits once or twice a week, this can help with participation. Other cool stuff that we're seeing, partnering with your child and adult care food program providers so that families can pick up their school meal school meal boxes, but also CSC FP type foods like formula for their infants. Also partnering with food pantries to provide families with boxes of groceries. Other cool stuff we're seeing, providing maps of meal sites and information in multiple languages and formats. So through social media, phone calls, flyers around neighborhoods, getting information out through community listservs, government agencies, so on. Also distributing information on pandemic EBT. So as Kristen was mentioning, if you have families who have students who are in the free and reduced price meal program, they qualify to be part of pandemic EBT, and they can get up to about $115 per student, and that money can be used at grocery stores, farmers markets. It's another way for us to fill this hunger need, because again, not all families can access the meal sites every day or at all. And families can have these pandemic EBT cards and still go to meal sites. Other cool things we're seeing our schools are equipping the school meal buses with Wi-Fi, so they are running mobile hotspots throughout communities so that students can actually complete assignments through distance learning. And in some states, we're seeing our schools making sure that those buses, those meal delivery buses, are being staffed with school counselors, psychologists, social workers, nurses to do wellness checks on our students. And this is especially important right now because unfortunately we are seeing an increase in child abuse calls to the child abuse and domestic violence hotlines. We're seeing an increase of 22%. So those wellness checks are critical at this time. And I'm sure you all have some awesome best practices that you would like to share when we do open it up for reflection and question and answers. I just want to share one more slide of information. Next slide, please. So I talked a lot about what these waivers are allowing us to do, and they're really helping us to innovate and meet family needs. So if your schools are not doing some of these cool things, go to the USDA website, and we have the link below, and we will try and send you this information as well. Go to the link below, and you can see what waivers your state has applied for, what pending waivers they have, what waivers they could still apply for. I do want to say that only about half of the states have applied for the pandemic EBT program. So I would definitely get on the phones to your senators and representatives and say, hey, why aren't we applying for this program? This is something, this is money on the table for our families. Let's implement this. And so you can go to this website and you can see if your state has already been approved for pandemic EBT or if has at least submitted a plan that's pending approval. And again, we can help you navigate all of this. And so that's it for now. Thank you. And I believe Ignacio is up next.
Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you, Angelica. Hi again, everybody. I want to take some time now to share some of the good things happening in New Mexico. But I would like to ask you if you'd indulge me for a moment. I want to share my own story of why ESPs are so important to me. So my father was a longtime union member. He was a maintenance worker at Sandia Labs in Albuquerque. My mother was a bus driver for a local Head Start program. And they instilled in me early on strong union values. And in addition to that, my two sisters were school secretaries and also strong union members. I come from a really large family. My oldest sister is 27 years older than I. And so in many ways, she's like a mother to me. So my sister Mary, when I started teaching in 1994, she pulled me aside. She's a secretary, and she's since retired. But back then, she pulled me aside and said, "You will always take care of your support staff because you can't do your job without them." And I always took that very seriously, and it really influenced me, and it really made me look out for ESP members, and I did a lot of advocacy for, our really essential education support professionals. The staff knew me as the bulldog. They called me the bulldog because they knew I would fight, and once I latched on, I didn't let go. So since then, I've come to work for NEA as an organizer, a UNICEF director, and now I'm with instruction and professional development. Now to the good things happening in New Mexico. Our state president, Mary Parr Sanchez, no relation, saw a real deep need for our ESPs to know their rights. It was referred to before that we need to be looking out for our ESPs. She saw that, and she put together a little team to send out a snail mail to give them the tools they needed to really stand up and advocate for themselves. So if you could go to the next slide. This is a copy of a letter that the president sent. And it thanks our members for stepping up and being on the front lines for all of us. And she states in this letter, and I'll quote, "NEA&M wants to make sure you are safe and have what you need during this difficult time. We want you to know that we are here in this together and we will stand with you." You'll notice it was a front and back letter, and it's bilingual in English and Spanish. New Mexico happens to be a bilingual state. The letter goes on to encourage members to read and keep the Know Your Rights card shown here. Next slide, please. So this was a card that was sent along with this letter. It was the idea came from one of our UDs, a former president of NEA New Mexico, Betty Patterson, and she's listening in now. And I just want to give a shout out to Betty, who's one of the best presidents we've ever had, and also one of the best UDs New Mexico is privileged to have. So these rights were reviewed by our legal team to ensure that our members could advocate for themselves and others according to the state law. So if you do use something like this, make sure that you get it approved by your legal team. And I'd like to quickly go through them as they have been very helpful in New Mexico, and perhaps they might be helpful for you. Of course, again, please have your legal team look at them. So number one, you have the right to be safe. Number two, you have the right to keep your family safe. Number three, you have the right to keep your job. Number four, you have the right to be paid no matter what your work situation has become. And number five, you have the right and obligation to speak up if safety measures are not followed without fear of retaliation. Okay, so now I'd like to take you on a little tour of New Mexico. If we could go to the next slide. This is a picture of the Oregon Mountains driving in from the east side going toward Las Cruces, New Mexico. And I want to share an example of an outstanding leader and also the local ESP affiliate there. Let's see here. Go to the next slide. So up in the upper left, her name is Irma Valdespino, and she is the president of the Classified School Employees Council of Las Cruces. They are an ESP bargaining unit. Irma is an outstanding leader. You can see her there in the top left. She's presenting to the school board, something she does every month. On the right, on the top right there she is with another member, and they're at a board meeting holding the board members and the management accountable, something that is so important for our ESPs to be able to do. The bottom left picture shows Irma with the NEA Las Cruces president on the right, and in the middle, that's our Congresswoman, Xochitl Torres Small. And, you know, we're talking about getting involved at the national level. Our ESPs can make a difference. They helped turn an anti-union seat into a pro-education seat. And on the bottom right there, they're celebrating this group. And Irma wanted me to really emphasize this. She's been a long time advocate and supporter, but she does it with a team, and they meet on a regular basis. I go there pretty regularly, and it's amazing the work that happens in that room with all of those people involved. So if we could go to the next slide. I quickly wanted to share a big win that they got. The governor of New Mexico announced school would be closed until April 6th, and they immediately got a memorandum of agreement to pay those who are in the front lines time and a half. They're currently working to get that extended and get back pay as well. You know, Irma, like so many of our outstanding leaders, has made a real difference for the employees of Las Cruces Public Schools. They're currently negotiating a new evaluation system for the employees with the district that will utilize NEA's professional growth continuum, the PGC, and this should result in more PD and higher pay for ESPs in the bargaining unit. She worked tirelessly to build a respected local with one of the best collective bargaining agreements you will find anywhere, and I can't emphasize that enough. Many of our new locals, we look to their collective bargaining agreement to find strong language. My hat's off to Irma and the wonderful team of her local leaders they put together in Las Cruces. Okay, so next slide. We travel from the south of New Mexico to the northwest. I'm hoping these pictures are going to entice many of you to come and visit our state. And if you do, contact us. We'd love to show you around. So we're going right into the Navajo Nation, where COVID has really hit them hard. This is a picture of Shiprock, named so because the Spaniards thought it looked like a tall ship on the horizon with giant sails. So right here, let me just tell you, the president of the Central Consolidated Education Association is Mike Moss. He's a plumber by trade and an ESP member. Again, he's the president of the Central Consolidated Education Association. This is a wall-to-wall local unit, and he is the president of that organization. He's an outstanding individual. At this point, actually, let's go to the next slide. Let you see a picture. He's the tall guy on the right. This was a picture that we took at a Hall of Fame awards banquet. Instead of just telling you about him, I would like him to speak directly to all of you. So let's hope this works out. I give to you my dear friend, Mike Moss. Mike?
Hey, Ignacio, how you doing? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. All
right, great. Thank you. This is a great presentation. I've really enjoyed it. Ignacio is a wonderful guy. I've been involved with NEA, oh my gosh, for a very long time. Like he said, I'm the president of a local. We're wall to wall. We've got New Mexico. We don't have fair share. We have to represent everybody. We've got 1,100 employees. We've got about 450 members, and we're wall to wall with support staff, the ESPs, and the teachers, the certified staff, and we represent everybody. And you know, we have to represent the entire bargaining unit. But you know, I just wanted, I talked to Ignacio this morning a little bit about this thing this evening, and I want to stress to folks that, you know, to you ESPs that are out there, you know, please step up. Don't be afraid of leadership. I'm serious. I served 6 years on the board of directors for the state of New Mexico. I was one of the founding organizers of our local at our district. I worked there 18 years. You know, for a long time as an ESP, I was a vice president, but I kind of had an attitude that, well, you know, I don't think I'd ever really want to be the president, because the president of a teachers union should be a teacher. And, you know, but I worked the bargaining, I worked the LMT, I worked the disciplinary meetings. I did all the things along with my teachers, my, you know, my team members in the local. And, you know, I realized that, you know what, with all their degrees in education and everything else, they didn't learn this stuff in college. They learned all this union activity the same way I did. They learned how to bargain at the bargaining table. They learned how to represent people in the disciplinary meetings. They learned how to present themselves in labor management team meetings at LMT meetings. And, you know, I realized a few years ago, there's no reason in the world why I can't be the president of our local. And the past president, our immediately past president, Mel Sharp, retired, and, you know, he appointed me on his way out. And then I have been elected a couple of times. But the thing is, these are tough times. The ESPs are on the front line. I'm working every day. I'm wearing a mask. I did my 8 hours today. Okay, we're out there. We're on the bleeding edge of this thing. I'm fighting tooth and nail because I've got administrators that are trying to shovel my people into the flames, and they're really getting on my nerves. You know, I've got coordinators that are threatening to dock people's pay because they don't have leave, and you know, and I'm arguing with them that, hey, we've got 900 people sitting at their house getting paid. Let's don't talk about cutting people's pay. Let's don't go there. You know, the thing is, please, you know, two things real quick. ESP members, don't be afraid to step up. Don't be afraid to activate yourselves. You know what? You learned this stuff. You learned union activity the same way everyone else did, on the job, okay? Another thing is, those local leaders, the presidents of locals and stuff, that are teachers, that are certified staff, you know, please be aware that you've got support staff that are in the buildings. You've got people that are on the front lines. You know, don't forget that. You know, but nobody can fight for an ESP like another ESP. And that's really important to remember. And I guess that's about it.
Thank you, Mike. I always enjoy listening to you, Mike. Mike, you know you're my hero. And well, speaking of heroes, next I want to ask Tim Barczak, another hero of mine, a person who has truly had a great deal of influence over me and has helped me to understand the importance of building partnerships. And to talk about an important partnership we need to continue to build is Tim Barczak. He's going to talk about our relationship with the National Farm to School Network. And if we could go to the next slide, and Tim, it's all yours.
Well, thanks a lot. Nice to see both Ignacio and Mike. And boy, Mike is doing a great job out there in the Four Corners. And it's such a heavy lift right now. The Dina people, the Navajo Nation, are being hit really hard with this COVID, and his district sits right in the middle of all that. So again, kudos to Mike Moss. Okay, National Farm to School Network. This organization is a leader in the effort to get more fresh and local foods in schools. They have partner groups in their networks, in virtually, I believe, every state, and you see an example there with Farm to Table in New Mexico. They've been a great ally to us at the NEA, and I think there are compelling reasons for our affiliates across the country to also consider them allies and join the network. It's important to understand the current situation with K-12 school meal programs. Most operate to a greater or lesser degree on what's called a freezer to oven system. That means our members are dealing a lot with processed food that is more likely to involve heating and serving than scratch cooking. And this is why we have so many school nutrition workers who are 3 to 5 hour per day employees. That wouldn't be happening with extensive food preparation and scratch cooking. The freezer to oven system unfortunately works well with the business model of privatizers. They have close relationships with vendors of processed foods, and these processed foods are cheap, and they enable them to operate with workers in whom they do not invest in professional development and who are given few working hours per day. So the current practice of freezer to oven, which is the opposite of fresh and local, is not good for child nutrition members. But most importantly, this over-reliance on processed food is not good for our students. For millions of children, school meals have become an essential source of nutrition. Keep in mind that pre-COVID, 34% of US households were economically insecure. And of those economically insecure, 52% were people of color. So for many of our students, these are not just snacks to get them through the day. Rather, the school meal may be the only substantive meal that they eat in a day. So it should be fresh food that nourishes our students, not processed food that makes it convenient for processors and food management companies to turn a profit. A transformed K-12 school meal program that utilized fresh food would mean healthier kids and nutrition workers with more hours, more training, and more of a chance to improve these important careers. I urge everyone to check out the link for the National Farm to School Network and to learn more about joining the network. And with that, I think we go back to Angelica.
Thank you. May we have the next slide, please? So it's perfect that Mike and Tim went right before this slide. Mike really painting a picture of what it's like to finish your 8-hour day, returning home bone tired, constantly fighting against the forces that want to either privatize the system and continue to feed our children junk. And Tim pointing out, but there's hope. There are partners that we can work with to make sure that, you know, we can get scratch cooking in our schools, and we can get whole fruits and vegetables to our students, and we can turn part-time jobs into full-time jobs as they should be. So I want us all to take this moment and imagine our perfect world. You know, what do your school kitchens look like? What do the school meals look like? What does it look like when you arrive to your school? What do you feel like when you're leaving your school? Just take this moment, close your eyes, and imagine what could be. And then in the chat box, just write out what your perfect world would be. And we'd like to reflect on this again when we get to the, when we open it up to all of you closer towards the end. I should be seeing a very active chat box because I know it ain't a perfect world right now. Fresh breakfast. Thank you, Rosemary. Less processed breakfast. How about students actually having time to finish their meals? How many times have we seen students being released from their classrooms and they get there towards the end of the meal time, they only have 5 minutes to finish their meal, and then they have to trash it? More community style meals, more time to eat, right? You have all of these great ideas, right? You all know what's best for our students, and you all have the power to achieve what's best for our students. So we really hope that you all continue this conversation with us and really amplify each other's voices. And we want to continue to give you those resources and direct you to those spaces where you can help make a difference. And I believe we have Ignacio next.
Kristen is next.
Kristen, sorry.
Next slide. Thank you. I would love to stay and imagine this all night in the chat box, because I feel like we've all been working towards these things, all of us in different ways throughout our careers for students. Want to reemphasize this one more time how we can all use your power together. And I want to share a little bit with you about a campaign that NEA is launching in response to the pandemic. And as we all know, we've talked about, the pandemic is having a really devastating impact on our students and educators, and especially communities of color. In times like these, we depend on the stability and the support of our public schools and our public health systems, and the safety nets that should be there. These services form a network of support that help communities grow and thrive, and they now face devastating cuts due to the economic downturn. And that's why NEA is launching this campaign. It's a national campaign to demand that Congress respect the work that educators do, keep our students, communities, and colleagues safe, support our families, and remove barriers for our collective participation and voice without exception. Congress can do this by immediately passing legislation to stabilize funding for public education that we talked about earlier, as well as addressing inequities impacting our students' opportunities, and provide necessary resources to protect our students and educators as they re-enter, as you all re-enter schools in the fall. And for some of you, it may be sooner. This moment calls on all of us to go all in for all of us together. So once again, we hope that you'll go to this link here. For those of you who are just on the phone, that's NEA.org/COVID action for more information and to take action. And I'm sure you will be hearing lots more in various ways from NEA and from your affiliates about this campaign. And I think I'm turning things back to Ignacio, but I wanted to say thank you one more time for letting me talk to you guys tonight and join this great group of presenters.
If we could go to the next slide. So this slide doesn't need much explaining. Now is the time for ESPs to stand up and demand the respect and pay you deserve. Strike while the iron is hot. And with that, I'm just going to send it back over to Tim.
Well, Jessica and I are going to go through any questions that have come in just a moment. But first, I want to thank all of our presenters again tonight. Kristen Driscoll, our lobbyist on the Hill with the NEA Center for Advocacy, and Helica Castellon with NEA's Education Policy and Practice Department, or Center rather, I'm sorry, and Ignacio Sanchez of NEA New Mexico, and Mike Moss of Central Consolidated School District, the president of Central Consolidated. And so as Jessica discovers any questions that we've had come in, I will kind of play traffic cop and try to steer them to the right presenter.
Thank you, Tim. So now, as Tim mentioned, we are going to open up the floor for question and answer. So if at this time you have any questions for any of our presenters, if you could please begin to type them in the chat box. We do have everyone on mute, and we would like everyone to stay on mute so that our recording can remain clean. But again, type your questions into the chat box. And so the only question that I have seen so far, it says, so many of our nutritionists have continued to serve all during this time. Now they are being asked to work over the summer. When do they get a break? So I don't know if that's rhetorical or if that's something that one of the presenters wanted to comment on.
So I'm thinking Ignacio, although he's IPD director now, Ignacio was a UNICEF director. He might want to take a swing at that one.
Yes, Tim, thank you. So I will share with you what they're doing in Las Cruces. Though they haven't got the back pay yet, they're still negotiating that. What they did make happen for those employees was to have a rolling system where they're not all working at the exact same time. So they are still getting paid, their full pay, but they work so many days out of the week and they switch off. So I don't know if that helps answer that question. That's the best I can do.
I think so. Thank you, Ignacio.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead,
Can I say
Jessica.
something else? I saw somebody write in the chat box asking about community gardens, and I really want to encourage you to reach out to your state farm to school network in New Mexico. We work very closely with the Farmers Market Association of New Mexico, and they have, I mean, just turnkey curriculum for teachers to be able to start school gardens in their classroom.
Okay, thank you, Ignacio. The next question is, where do we contact if we think our district is not within the NEA guidelines for distributing lunches?
So it's not NEA guidelines, it's actually the federal government's waivers that allow our schools to do all of the cool things that I was talking about. And really every state should be availing themselves of those waivers to make sure that every student is accessing those meals. If you would like help with this, go ahead and email any of us on our school nutrition team. So that's either Kristen, myself, or Tim. Also, we're joined by Chloe Marshall out of our CAPE department. But any one of us you can email and we can definitely guide you through that process.
Thank you for that. The next question is directed specifically to Kristen. It says, Kristen, can you say again what the education stabilization funds can be used for? Some of our folks have asked if school systems can use those funds to backfill deficits in school nutrition departments.
That is a great question, Sam, and I should have talked a little bit more about this earlier. So while the education stabilization funds can be used to pay staff, we have teamed up with a number of other national organizations to request funds from the Department of Agriculture be made allowable to backfill. So it's a big problem, right? So obviously you're hearing about this. In some places where they're serving maybe only about 20% on average of the students they normally would, because they're keeping staff, which is great and what we want, and running the program, they're running dangerously close or into deficits. And so we're also asking Congress to provide $2 billion and allow the Department of Agriculture to do some additional allowances to make sure that we backfill those programs rather than allowing them to go into the red. We don't have any assurances whether or not Congress will do that, although I'm encouraged by some of what we're hearing on both sides of the aisle about whether or not this will happen. So it's my hope that bipartisanship will prevail and that that additional pot of money will be available from USDA to do that. So school meals programs are sort of an interesting hybrid on the Hill. You experience them as a seamless part of the school, but you know that they're run on separate books. Well, on the Hill, they're run out of completely separate departments from education, and we do our best to bridge the education world because of the importance of nutrition to kids being ready to learn. So we're also having big supporters of education on the Hill weigh in on this issue with their counterparts who work on agriculture issues. And hopefully we'll have a positive update for you on that.
Okay, thank you, Kristen.
Sure.
The next question is from Betty. She asks, some districts are serving really good lunches, others are serving snacks. Is there a requirement?
There
So,
are. Oh, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say either Angelica or Kristen, because there are definitely requirements. Go
And
ahead.
I forgot that you were assigning the questions. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So yes, I can speak, and then Kristen can definitely correct me and add on. There are requirements, and depending on if it's a school or an off-school provider, schools are usually providing breakfast and lunch, or lunch and or 2 lunches. But there are requirements even for our off-school or off-site providers. So they can have to do like a snack and supper, or they're doing 2 suppers. But no, it cannot all just be snacks. And I think, I'm not sure if you mean snack like how USDA defines snack, or snack foods, but either way there are requirements, and it can't be a bag of snack foods. We still have to provide, fruits, vegetables, milk. Kristen, anything to add?
Nope, you covered it beautifully as usual.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, are we eligible for hazard pay?
I think that's going to be an Ignacio question, because that's actually pertains more to local bargaining.
Right. So in New Mexico, and I can't speak for other states, but in New Mexico, it's not a requirement, but it is something that can and has been bargained. And I sent a text to Mike. I'm hoping he's still on, because let me give him a second. I'd like him to share his story of how he got that hazard pay. And I don't think he is on. So let me share with you what he are you there, Mike?
Yeah.
Yes. Would you share?
Go ahead. Yeah, we were discussing this. The governor's initial closure order was funded through April the 6th. And, the public education department was funding hazard pay and stuff through that date. And then after that, that funding quit. But I was able to talk to our finance director, and he was in agreement that, I told him, I said, hey, these folks that are on the front lines, these folks that are literally, these cooks and these food service workers that are literally handing the food to these people, that are facing the public on the feeding program. And we also have buses that are going out to the bus stops, and they're taking breakfast and lunches out to the bus stops, and and the bus drivers and the bus aides are handing out the food to the kids in the feeding program. So I said, hey, the folks that are actually dealing with the public that are at risk for this virus, I said they need to keep getting the pay. And they agreed that and they are still getting time and a half. And I even threw myself under the bus. I said, we're in the buildings, there's nobody in the buildings, we're not really at risk. I guess everyone's at risk when you leave your house. We're under a stay-at-home order from our governor, but we're really not, because we're working inside buildings that have been closed for, they've been empty for 3 or 4 weeks. They're pretty safe. But anyway, my finance director is a good guy, and they agreed, my administrators and my administration agreed that, that we need to keep paying these people the extra pay, because they really are putting it all on the line. And one really simple thing is that, you got to ask for that. It's just that simple. You got to ask for it. They're not going to, they might be awful nice folks. They're not going to jump up and offer it to you. You got to ask for it. So that's about it.
Thank you for that. The next question that we have, it says, I don't know if I missed this, but how can I find ways to volunteer or serve meals in my state, which is California. Is there a link I can follow?
Does any one of the presenters know about that particular issue about volunteer opportunities? Because I don't.
Excuse me, Tim and Ignacio. I would suggest what's happening in New Mexico is many of our local affiliates and the leadership are taking that on. And maybe if you haven't reached out to your local leadership, check with them. They may be able to help you to find ways to volunteer and serve.
This is Kristen too. I would just add that I've seen those opportunities appear, at least in my school district here in Arlington, Virginia, on sort of local listservs. So I know that's not a helpful link for folks, but if maybe there's, and obviously check with your affiliate first, but there have seemed to be a lot around this area for opportunities.
Great. And then the last question that I see listed for tonight, it says that it was mentioned that best practices now suggest serving food from a cart so that our food service professionals are not handing food into cars. Is there a best practices guideline such as this from NEA to share with our districts, or is this coming from a federal agency?
So Ms. Castillon, I believe that EPP has some guidelines. There are also, I should just mention, new CDC school nutrition worker guidelines, although they're not as comprehensive as we would like, but CDC does have a new set of guidelines out specifically for school nutrition workers. But Angelica, you want to chime in?
Right. Actually, some of our partners have put forth some really good guidelines and even some training videos. So curbside pickup, still totally okay. It's just there's a different way of doing it now to ensure the safety of families and our food service workers. So we can share, and I want to make sure ESPQ is cool with this first. We can definitely share some of the guidelines that our partners are putting out, and they have some really cool infographics as well, and it just shows how you would use a cart in this situation to protect yourself and the families.
Thank you. So Jessica, how are we looking on questions now?
So that was the last question that we had. So thank you everyone for all of your questions that you had for us this evening. Since I'm not seeing any more, I'm going to go ahead and move on to wrap up things for tonight. On behalf of the ESP Quality Department and the Center for Great Public Schools, we would like to thank you for taking the time to participate in this evening's webinar. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording of this webinar in 7 to 10 business days. We'll also work to make sure that a link is made available on our ESP PD Archives webpage. And there are many ways for you to continue to stay engaged on topics such as the one that we had tonight. And one resource is by joining us in our NEA Ed Communities. Ed Communities is NEA's online professional learning community, and it allows educators to collaborate on issues that are important to them, such as and share resources and ideas and network and so much more. And so we encourage you, if you are not a member, to join. It has a variety of groups, such as the ESP Hot Issues group or the Paraeducator Institute group. And you can search for these groups by topic. You can even create your own platform for a group. So any of those options are available to you. So we invite you to connect also on that platform as well. Please be sure to regularly visit our ESP Professional Development webpage. The link is listed here on the page, and you will have access to upcoming webinars that we have. We have webinars monthly, and so you'll have access to see what's up and coming. In a moment, we won't be changing our screen because we don't have a screen to change because we are in Zoom and not Adobe Connect. So at this time, this is all the information that we have for you this evening. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to continue to put them into the chat. I can pass those on to our presenters. Again, thank you to all of our presenters for joining us this evening, and thank you to all our participants for joining us tonight. We hope that you have a wonderful evening.